Good morning, and thank you everyone for attending today. On behalf of RX360, I just want to say that we are, can everybody hear me? I just want to say that we're honored to be here and to participate as the most recent COE Center of Excellence for the Supply Chain Toolkit. And so thank you again to all of our hosts. They've done an outstanding and wonderful job, and I just want to thank all of you for your coordination and your gracious hospitality. So I represent RX360. We are a nonprofit industry consortium consisting of approximately 124 members, and our primary focus is to bring together suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, logistics providers, as well as additional service providers for the purposes of education and sharing information and best practices in an effort to ensure supply chain integrity, product quality, and most importantly, patient safety. And so I'll start off with just a brief introduction to good distribution practices and where they fit in within the APEX Supply Chain Security Toolkit and broader supply chain security practices. Different supply chain risk considerations that we're all going through in an era of disruption, as well as just thinking through what is happening for all of our economies, all of our organizations right now with supply chain disruption and the evolution that we're seeing largely driven by various technological innovation, and how the importance of GDP comes into play in safeguarding product quality and patient safety. And so as we think through this, I'll provide kind of a brief background on GDP, but as we think through everything going on right now, globally what we're seeing is an increasing demand for medical products, particularly prescription drugs, a flurry of innovative new therapies and novel therapies, including specialty medications, gene therapy, personalized medicine, and many products that are now requiring advanced cold chain transportation and storage capabilities. And as we all experienced coming back from the most recent meeting in Singapore, the growing threat of cyber threats, most notably recently from the CrowdStrike event, and we're all undergoing and facing an impetus for supply chain sustainability. And so the APEX Supply Chain Security Toolkit and the model for GDP is in process now of being updated, and it will now have an additional focus on hazard identification and risk mitigation strategies as we go forward. And so coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, the events really highlighted globally the various challenges that we all experienced with supply chain resilience. And building on top of that, all of these new therapies requiring new capabilities across the supply chain in how we handle, store, and manage all of these medical products, and the criticality of good distribution practices in ensuring product quality, supply continuity, and patient safety. And so going forward, amongst this disruption and technological innovation, the introduction of new products, the new entrants in these new emerging business models, good distribution practices and the educating of our supply chain professionals become our most critical tool for ensuring product quality and patient safety. And so good distribution practices are part of a larger set of standard practices that we have utilized in the life sciences and healthcare and medical product industries going back decades to ensure safe and effective medical products are reaching our patients and our customers. And so this starts with the production of products, sourcing supply, producing products, packaging products, and most of this and the quality assurance all falls under what we generally refer to, and including in the APEX toolkit, as good manufacturing practices. As we have inventory that we buy and supply, work in process, and finished goods, the quality assurance of these stored medications to ensure product efficacy and quality is another key set of practices. And then once these products are then shipped into the supply chain, that's really where good distribution practices come into play to ensure that the quality of the medical products are maintained by the means of adequate control across our numerous activities of storage, handling, transportation, and securing the product from counterfeits, unapproved, illegally imported, stolen, substandard, adulterated, or misbranded, or otherwise adulterated medical products. And so I'll touch a little bit on the risks, but the reason I think this toolkit is so important to someone like me is during the pandemic, I was working at Amazon. So I was leading the launch of the first Amazon pharmacy, which went live right before the pandemic hit in November of 2019. And so as we were launching pharmacies across the United States, what I found most important was that the Apex Supply Chain Security Toolkit and toolkits like that, they focus very, very importantly on the what and the how. But often what I find most important, and this toolkit really, really does drive and deliver on, is the why. All of these medications, from the sourcing of raw materials all the way through consumption, recalls, and destruction, it's your loved ones, it's my loved ones, it's all of us, that when something does go wrong, there's dire consequences. And so all supply chains are inherently risky, but medical product supply chain is even riskier. And so we can look back, and as I educated a lot of new employees who came in, whether we were launching a parking lot vaccination clinic to inject people in the arm from the side of their car, which I had never done before, as we were doing, installing new freezers in distribution centers and pharmacies to store these products, what was really, really important as I worked with our professionals was to make sure they understood the why. And so if we look at adulterated heparin in 2008, or in 2012, the counterfeit Avastin incidents, the consequences of supply chain failures are drastic. And for our member organizations of RX360 and various economies, there's significant regulatory consequences. Manufacturers have received fines as high as $500 million for CGMP violations, or up to $21 billion in lawsuits for opioid distribution. And for the companies themselves, there's significant economic consequences, where most companies that announce a major supply chain disruption or event have seen their stock prices fall by approximately 9%. So not only does this make sense for patient safety and product quality, but it also makes good business sense to incorporate practices included in GDP and the Apex Supply Chain Security Toolkit into your business operations. And so our goal was always to make sure that we ensure product quality and safety, good manufacturing processes, good storage practices, good distribution practices, so that we are getting our patients and our customers the right goods in the right quantity, in the right condition, to the right place, at the right time, and at the right cost. And so, taking a step back, what we're seeing right now is an incoming silver tsunami. And so, everything that we're doing right now, all of the technological evolution that we're seeing in the supply chain, good distribution practices become more essential than ever. Globally, across all of our economies, we're going to have an accelerating demand for prescription drugs, because by the year 2050, we are going to go from 1 in 19 today individuals in the world that are over 65 to approximately 1 in 9 per the United Nations. And so with increasing aging population, increasing comorbidities, there's just going to be an acceleration of demand for prescription drugs. New novel therapies requiring more advanced storage, handling, and transport capabilities. All of us are focusing on supply chain traceability and sustainability. And so whether that is green buildings, green packaging, or reducing our carbon footprint, all of these new products and all of these new vendors that we're working with have the potential to deliver massive value, but also they introduce new risk. And so we need to make sure that as we go through areas that like USP is championing right now in the GDP Toolkit update to identify and mitigate those risks, we're identifying, mitigating those, and educating all these new entrants on the opportunities, but also the risks that they need to mitigate. And then we go through, and we talked about traceability and serialization, but overall digital transformation is also bringing about risks to supply chain security, product security, and then as we see highlighted most notably from the COVID-19 pandemic and ongoing disruptions globally, a key focus on supply chain resilience to ensure patient continuity. And so one of the areas that I remember focusing on heavily when I was training a lot of our volunteers or people who were voluntold that they needed to support pharmacy continuity and operations or Operation Warp Speed in the United States to roll out the vaccine was making sure they understood the current operating model that most people tend to think that we operate with versus really what we're seeing in terms of evolution. And so most policy both in the United States economy and globally, really kind of developed around a linear view of the supply chain, going from the manufacturer to the distributor to the dispensers and then ultimately to the patients. But what we see right now, which increases the risk and increases the importance of tools like the APEX Supply Chain Security Toolkit, is really what we're dealing with is an interconnected web. And so rather than a supply chain, it's a web of various service providers, manufacturers, distributors, and contract providers all the way through the supply chain. And so this increasing complexity with trading partners now operating in multiple capacities with various types of licensing and various roles and responsibilities increases the need to make sure there's key education on what's going on in the supply chain. And that's really where the Supply Chain Security Toolkit focused on good distribution practices comes into play. And interoperability challenges, as just referenced, these continue to be a challenge globally. And so as we now have this digital product following the physical product, we're increasing our complexity in day-to-day transactions and increasing variability. And globally, we're just seeing increased regulatory complexity, trading customs, border trade. All of these things add additional complexity and variability into our supply chains. And so if we think about what the APEC Supply Chain Security Toolkit goals are, they largely align to what a distribution system developed on the foundation of GDP should prioritize. That support ultimately the safe and effective delivery of medication. So we want to ensure continuous supply. We want to make sure the product is stored, handled, and transported appropriately. We want to reduce waste, minimize drug waste, minimize loss, spoilage, contamination, and obsolete products. Making sure that we're storing drugs in a way that has business continuity built in, so we avoid the risk of additional loss. Efficient transport, mitigating loss during transport, avoiding theft and fraud, making sure we can prove all of this with accurate record keeping, and most critically perhaps information sharing and education to make sure that all of our managers, our staff, we're providing them the right information and the right tools for continuous education so that whether it's suppliers, vendors, and partners that you're working with, that we're making sure that end-to-end the supply chain is safe, secure, and that our patient supply is maintained adequately. And so the APEC GDP toolkit includes 10 different modules. They're focused on ensuring supply chain security and product integrity. And I think perhaps for me, in all of this, the biggest takeaway that I always stressed to my employees and my team when they would say, okay, who is responsible for that? And in the supply chain, all of us are responsible for making sure that drugs are safe and effective in reaching our patients safely. We want to make sure products are genuine and authorized. We're preventing the introduction of falsified and substandard products from entering the supply chain. Our storage conditions are observed. We're maintaining product quality and efficacy. The right products are delivered in the right route, in the right way, on time, and that we're ensuring product traceability throughout, which includes unit-level serialization, lot traceability, and recall management. And so I wanted to actually talk about supply chain disruption, but also get into some use cases, and then we can open this up for questions if that makes sense. But we can talk about all the areas where we know that the toolkit and good distribution practices are critical. But I think as we think of disruption, there's also a lot of opportunity that comes through and what we're seeing in the market right now around innovation. And so I wanted to highlight a company in the United States. It's an online pharmacy called Alto. And so their biggest focus right now is on fertility treatments, which if anyone has any familiarity with fertility treatments are emotionally sensitive. They're very, very complex. They often require cold chain logistics, and they require advanced coordination among compounded medical products, standard medical products, and often evolving dosages. And so as we think through a lot of these things, what are the different challenges and how is Alto approaching this? And so, again, given all these challenges, they're trying to provide high-touch care by working directly with patients, physicians, specialty pharmacies, and compounded pharmacies. One, to educate the patient and keep the patient informed, but also bring all of these medications together. That way they can provide a uniform delivery to the patient where they are, whether they're at home whether they're at work. And to do that requires significant delivery capabilities. And so as we think through the high cost of these medications, their risk of loss or obsolescence, all of the different therapies that are going on, it's critical to ensure on-time delivery, which includes products that require cold chain and carefully coordinated delivery. And so what Alto has been able to do via development of software and coordinating with their logistics partners, compound pharmacies, distributors, and alternative specialty pharmacies is effectively provide one point of contact and one point of care to be able to deliver these products to their patients wherever they are, whenever they're looking for them, and make sure that they're educating and coordinating with all of their delivery service providers in various markets around the United States economy to deliver these products on time and ensure their appropriate chain of custody and signature for deliveries. In addition, these are very, very complex treatments. Patients are experiencing emotional fatigue often, and so making sure that you're providing high-touch patient support, you have visibility to where the products are, where the deliveries are, making sure you have pictures to ensure that delivery occurred appropriately. All of these things go in to coordinating that. And so in addition to that, Alto pharmacists generally go out of their way. You can call them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they can provide outreach, direct contact. They even go out into YouTube and they create videos for their customers to be able to see how to appropriately inject medications or administer appropriately. I talk about all these things because you're bringing together not just a single organization, but you're bringing together, in some cases, dozens of organizations to make sure a patient gets their drugs safely and effectively at the right place, at the right time, through the right route. And I think as we look at good distribution practices under the APEX Supply Chain Security Toolkit, the most important area here that should jump out to everyone is the importance of an effective quality management system to bring all of these pieces together to make sure that all of the suppliers, all of the vendors are documented, they're licensed, they're capable and qualified to operate appropriately, they've been audited, they've been reviewed, and the organization is able to identify that these organizations are all capable of delivering safe and effective medications to their patients. And so they've brought together software and hardware, but more importantly, they've had to educate many in-market delivery service providers across the United States economy in various cities to be able to provide courier-level delivery services, both their own couriers as well as third-party couriers. And bringing all of those things together really stresses a key element of the toolkit, which is an effective quality management system. One of the other areas that I thought around current innovation that we're seeing in the supply chain, given the increasing demand for drugs, a shortage of clinicians with an increasing population, and the ability to reduce costs, reduce fill errors, and improve adherence is around pharmacy automation. And so generally, the toolkit ends at the dispenser, but as we see new models in the supply chain start to begin, shift, and evolve, I think it's important that we look at how can we bring good distribution practices and the toolkit into new supply chain models and delivery to customers. And so pharmacy automation has significant upside. You're able to streamline prescription processing, reduce the total sites, and optimize your inventory management, and bring down the cost of care, bring down the cost of delivering medications. And so it allows pharmacists to what we call perform at the top of their license. And so in the United States economy, pharmacists were critical in administering vaccines, prescribing alternatives, and providing consultation and education to patients. I have 2 grandparents left. They see their doctor a few times a year. They see their pharmacist sometimes every week. And so being able to reduce the strain and burden on a pharmacist by offering pharmacy automation can really give the pharmacist a lot more time to do higher value clinical work. We get speed and service advantages via automation. You can consolidate sites and scale via mail order pharmacies or central fill pharmacies much easier, and ultimately increase patient adherence. But as we get into a lot of these operations, they're beginning to operate in many cases a lot more like distributors. They're buying direct from manufacturers, they're bringing medication in. And at least just one area that I'd like to touch on is around adherence packaging. Is everyone familiar with what adherence packaging is? Like a pill pack? So in some cases, as a patient, you may get 90 packs a month, 3 prescriptions taken a day. It could include up to 70 medications. And so as we get into key elements of the supply chain there, premises and equipment becomes obviously much more critical, because if a patient has a sulfide allergy, well, it's really going to be helpful to make sure that the right drug is going through the right machine at the right time and it's not being contaminated. And so the objective of all of this must be to increase patient adherence, but also make sure that as these new models and new entrants and new players emerge, that we can bring good distribution practices into these models and make sure that we're ensuring the right cleanliness, the right quality, and all of the measures that patients need to ensure they're receiving safe drugs. And so this is where, within the toolkit, an area that I know with my teams I stress significantly was taking that risk-based approach to good distribution practices and mitigation strategies as it relates to the QMS, but also making sure that we're focusing on our premises and equipment, making sure everything's clean, making sure that we can ensure product integrity, efficacy, and in particular, avoiding cross-contamination. And so as I was training a lot of our employees and a lot of our pharmacists who often have little to no supply chain education, it was kind of a new area where we could introduce this into our distribution operations, but also bring a lot of that knowledge and that sharing from the toolkit into our dispensing operations and kind of cross-collaboration. And so the toolkit provides a framework for continuous education, but it doesn't have to necessarily end in as we see these new models of direct-to-consumer pharmacies where manufacturers more and more frequently are going to look to bypass some of the previous middlemen, being able to make sure we keep our eye on how these models work and bring the toolkit in place to ensure supply chain integrity becomes much more critical. And so that was all I had prepared, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Anybody have questions? Yes, over here.
Hi, I'm Jiyeon Han from AstraZeneca Korea, and I'm responsible for regulatory affairs in Korea organization. So I'm just wondering, I understand that there are many countries requiring local importation testing, which has been released and tested by manufacturing site, and Korea has the same requirement as well. So from Eurogroup perspective, what's your thought on that kind of requirements, and how do you think about these requirements?
Thank you. Under the toolkit and under good distribution practices, I think we get into make sure we have accurate record keeping and information sharing. And so in my experience with a product being released from the manufacturing site and arriving at my distribution center, whether it was made by my organization or made by a third party or perhaps even another organization, making sure that you have the right systems and processes in place to bring those products in. And generally my experience was we really wanted to make sure that we had good processes and sound processes in place, but also that we had really, really strong technology and systems in place to know that when a product arrived, had the right documentation been provided, and was it still in quarantine, or was it available to be released and sold? And so we had the right SOPs and the right documentation, but also critically making sure we had interoperable transfer of information. So the moment that product's information, if it wasn't released when it arrived, it was released, our warehouse management systems and software systems could trigger the release, or we had processes in place that could ultimately receive the information, then go out and release the product and physically move it into a location where it was available for saleable product.